Thank you.
I'll see you in the
Recorder out. So that those that weren't able to attend can join us. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to Nataki from West Atlanta Watershed. She's going to just speak on kind of what our current events, kind of what's going on in Atlanta and around the country. And we're going to enjoy a moment of silence after that.
Thank you, Adriana. It's my pleasure to be here today. Today is my birthday, so I am spending it, or at least part of it, with you all. But these are also very troubling times, not only in our city, but across our country and the world. And so we thought that it was appropriate just to acknowledge that as we're moving into this conversation on today. For the past, 2 months or so, we've all been confronted with the COVID-19 pandemic in many different ways. And we've talked about the fact that these are uncertain times, these are strange and disrupted times. And what we're also seeing in the midst of that pandemic is that kind of this scab is being pulled off of various gaping wounds that have been caused by a lot of systemic inequalities and inequities in our country. And one of those things, quite frankly, that we're seeing is how pervasive racism is in the United States and in our culture. And so as I'm reminded, haunted even, of what happened just last week to George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I'm also reminded of what, happened to Ahmaud Arbery, to Sandra Bland, to so many other people who have been impacted by things like violence from police, what appears to be violence that is being perpetrated on Black people as well as other people of color in this country. And as a Black woman who was born and raised in the South, as the mother of a Black boy, these are things that I can't really, escape. They are with me all of the time. What I do find is that, amidst all of this craziness, what has really been helping to hold me together over the past 2 months with all the craziness going on is my ability to connect with nature and to connect with the parks and green spaces in my community. Even as I say that, I'm reminded of what just recently happened with Christian Cooper in Central Park in New York. And this whole idea that even birding while being Black is an issue, is a challenge that is connected to the systemic racism and even internalized racism and oppression that we see happening in our country. And while I want us to be able to move from this point to move into some positive dialogue, all of this is kind of in the backdrop. There's some context that we're moving into this conversation with that is very important. It's even very sobering. So as we think about, reconnecting to our roots and getting back reconnected to the nature in our communities and in our backyards, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that as we are seeking to make nature this place that provides this solace and peace and a place of comfort and respite for people, that for people of color, it has not always signified that as well. I'm going to move on, but I just have to lift up a name, Mr. Andrew Fellers, who is one of the co-founders of the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance and one of our original board members. He recently passed away in April of this year, and he was in his mid-80s. And when we started doing a lot of work around places like the Outdoor Activity Center and the Cascade Springs Nature Preserve and the Lionel Hampton-Beecher Hills Preserve, what Mr. Feller said to us, and he grew up in rural North Carolina, he said, we're calling these places green spaces now, but when I grew up, we called this the woods. And the woods was not a place where we spent a lot of time, especially, after dark. And he talked about the legacy of lynching and other things that African people in this country experienced in the woods. And so that, to me, kind of brings up that complicated past, but also just gives us something to think about as we figure out and continue to work to make sure that all Atlantans, all people are connected in substantial ways to the nature that can heal us. That doesn't have to be that example of what it was in the past. And so with that, I want us, if we could just join in for a moment of silence for all those who have been affected by many of the recent events that we have witnessed. And then after that moment of silence, we can move on with the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nataki. Really appreciate you taking the time on your birthday to join us and to share that with us. So we're going to move forward and we're going to go over the agenda for the day. It's a tight schedule, so we're going to try to get on as much as we can. So like I said, I'm Adriana Garcia. I'm the Nature Accessibility Advocate at Park Pride. And today we're going to be having we're going to have a couple awesome speakers coming on today. First is going to be, after I speak a little bit, will be Erica Holloman Hill, which that's a typo. Dr. Erica Holloman Hill, I apologize. She's going to be here from West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, and she's will be sharing on the activity that they've been doing on the west side of Atlanta for many, many years, and her experience in doing that. Then we'll move on to David Davis. He's the president of the Friends of Cascade Springs Nature Preserve. He's going to share a little bit about his role there and how you guys can get involved in that. We'll move on to Corliss Clare. She's the co-chair of the Adams Park Foundation. And she's going to speak a little bit on her invasive removal project she's been working on there. Lastly, we'll hear from Judy Yee. She's the Director of Outreach and Marketing at Trees Atlanta. She'll be sharing some info on the tree protection ordinance and how you can get involved in that. Then we'll have a couple minutes for questions, not too long, but I do encourage you to put your questions in the chat, or I'll have my email address at the end of this this presentation, so you can send me an email if you do have questions. So we're going to go on I'm going to share a little bit about what Park Pride is and what Nature for All Atlanta is, which is the initiative that actually brought us together today. And Ellen, if you want to go to the next slide. You can. Awesome, thank you. So a little bit about Nature for All. It's an initiative, like I said, championed by Park Pride, West Atlanta Watershed, and Trees Atlanta, and it's funded by the Turner Foundation. Our goal is to advance the vision of an Atlanta with a protected tree canopy and residents with equitable access to an interconnected networks of parks, green spaces, urban trails, and urban forests and trails. So I come from a background of playing in the woods most of my life. And as I got older, I realized it was something that I really wanted to, I wanted to help others also connect with nature, because I became so passionate about it. So that kind of brought me to Park Pride. And Park Pride is a local nonprofit that supports communities across Atlanta in caring for their neighborhood parks. The basis of our work is supporting local Friends of the Park groups, like the Cascade Springs Nature Preserve Friends of the Park group. And also we have volunteer projects, and there's other ways to get involved, like giving matching grants for park improvements. We organize, we have professional park design services. We provide learning opportunities and resources, and advocating for more resources for public parks and trails. We believe communities are experts on their own parks and their neighborhoods, so we respond to their unique needs. And that's really how Nature for All comes into play. We realize that everybody recreates differently, and everyone sees themselves in the outdoors differently. And kind of going back to what's going on with in the country right now is not everyone feels comfortable in parks and green spaces. Not everyone feels welcome. So we hope that, you know, with this initiative and going forward, we're working towards making these spaces more equitable and more welcoming to everyone. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Erica, Dr. Erica, and she's going to speak with us about her work with West Atlanta Watershed Alliance.
Yes, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Hi, so my name is Dr. Erica Holloman Hill, and I've had the pleasure of working for the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance for almost 3 years now. And as we keep in theme with today's topic of deeply rooted, my journey back home, back here in Atlanta, to do this work has come full circle. I say that because I am a true ATLM, proud of it, Southwest baby, not a Grady born baby. And I say that because a lot of us were born, but I was born at South Fulton. And for anybody who's familiar with the southwest side of Atlanta, it was an old hospital off of Fairburn Road off Benjamin E. Mays Drive. And so the story of Deeply Rooted and the role that the organization that I joined 3 years ago in a space that I grew up in and around has just been an amazing opportunity to talk about the importance of being able to establish deep roots. And I say so because those of us who understand Atlanta, especially the southwest side of Atlanta, we understand that there's a historical legacy as it relates to Black folks being in the southwest side that is reflective of more the current 1960s white flight. And I say though because that's where my journey in Southwest Atlanta began, when my grandfather became the first Black man to move on to East Ridge in 1960, which is right down the street from John A. White Park, which is one of these other green spaces along the Cascade corridor from the Outdoor Activity Center to Cascade Springs. Wawa has had a significant hand both in the forefront and in the background as it relates to the maintenance, the upkeep, and really the cultural connection and relevancy of these urban green spaces in Southwest Atlanta and the Black communities that these green spaces have served over the years. I have a particular personal story of remembrance of when I was a young individual teen in high school, where I remember a time when we had to hop the locked gate to Cascade Springs. But once we hopped that gate, oh, the magical wooded world we found in the oasis that now, due to the changes and the infrastructure that not only Wawa, but the Friends of groups of Cascade have been able to grow to now where we have an automated gate that easily allows access. And it's just amazing to see that connection and growth, not only for the community, but for that growing living space itself. And so as we talk about, again, the role of community, not only in the stewardship of these spaces, but also the maintenance, the education, and most importantly, the advocacy, which ends up on various scales of policy, from the proper tree ordinance to ensuring that these same parks and spaces and green spaces serve as anchors and not displacers for the growing new wave of population demographic shifts that we see occurring in the context of gentrification. And in the space of this green conversation, we talk about green gentrification. And so I just wanted to kind of share a background and little bit of Wawa's perspective and role of understanding the importance and the need for an ACE model. And we say ACE being authentic community engagement. So how do we continue to make sure that residents that are surrounding these urban parks and green spaces, the neighborhood organizations, and the individuals that utilize and use these spaces are actively engaged and have equitable access to the decision making tables that ultimately impact not only that park, but as we are coming to understand scientifically, individuals' qualities of life as well. And knowing that there's already a 10 to 12-year difference in the quality of life from residents on the west and southwest side of Atlanta versus the other side, the need of hearing solutions as well as recommendations on how these green spaces and parks can best serve the communities that have been surrounding them for years become so important in this day and time. And
Thank you.
so,
Oh, sorry.
yeah,
Go
no,
ahead.
no. So I just, if we had any questions or if anybody wanted to talk. So I just wanted to talk specifically too a little bit regarding Wawa's role, not only in Cascade Springs, but really the overarching leaders in understanding the need of protecting undeveloped land from development and uh, the importance of and the power of community coming together to do just that. And Lionel Hampton-Beecher is a great model and hyperlocal example of how when community has a vision for what they see currently and projected in the future as their need. And what community said was they didn't want to see that space develop. And Wawa helped to guide that process that allowed for the purchase and then the overturning of that park in two cities. And so just very excited and glad to be able to one, come back home full circle to continue to be a part of a great organization that works very deeply rooted in community to continue and do this work in a place that I love because I'm ATL true all day, every day.
I love that. And I think it adds a lot when you hear the kids in the background. I love that.
Oh, yes.
They're happy playing outside. That's how I grew up.
Yeah, no, it's a lifesaver. But it's just an interesting conversation here in the Metro East Point, which is my childhood home. I've been dealing with codes and compliance because we erected a tent in the front yard. And some of the neighbors thought that it was not the most pleasurable thing to have in the front yard. And so just, setting a new precedent for the city of East Point as it relates to objects and others.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do you have anything else you want to share with us before we move on to Dave Davis?
No, just really as we're talking about these deeply rooted conversations, for me as an earth system scientist, it's just most importantly to remember our role first as humans, and for some, and I'm speaking specifically in this current state where most African Americans still unconsciously aren't even seen as human, aren't even valued as human, are placed back into the circle of humanity first. So then humanity as a whole can be placed back into its rightful place in this cycle of life on this planet, which we understand is a closed system. That means that we are all connected. And so, in this current state, it's my hope and goal that we return to a human species that's connected once again to this planet, for what we understand is that race is not real, but has serious and real social implications.
Yes, I agree. I appreciate that, Erica. I'm going to go ahead and move on to Dave Davis. He is, like I said, the president of the Friends of the Cascade Springs Nature Preserve. and he's going to take it from here.
So good afternoon, everybody. So my name is David Lloyd Davis, and I am the executive director, actually, of the Friends of Cascade Springs Nature Preserve. We are developing a nonprofit, and this is a great opportunity for the Southwest Atlanta community, and in particular, the Nature Preserve is visited not just from the local community, but all through the metro and people from other countries. It's actually probably one of the most visited spots in Southwest Atlanta. And specifically now, during the pandemic, we're seeing a huge amount of people coming and visiting. It's a 125-acre site located on Cascade Road in Southwest Atlanta. It has one entrance, and it exists because of, as Erica mentioned, and that the community got together and decided they wanted to protect this land against further development. It had been developed back in the 1800s as a resort, and it was actively, it was, the land was disturbed, and there was cabins built and trails, and it was being used as a resort, an exclusive resort, for a certain time, and eventually that became obsolete. And during the Maynard Jackson administration, the land was purchased under the pressure of the community and the guidance of a planning committee that involved people who were in Wawa and various other community members, so that they could purchase this land and preserve it and have it sort of reflect a character of conservation, conservation of the natural environment. And so I live right beside it. Went back in 1998, 1995, I came from Toronto. I'm from Toronto, Canada. And I grew up with huge amounts of parks living around, existing around where we lived. And so I was always in the park. My friends were in the park. We were always kind of running around free in the park. And so when I came to Atlanta and discovered this property, I had to live near it. So I purchased this 100-year-old house that is right beside the park. And I have tons of land that just kind of seamlessly adds into the park. And for years, I sort of thought that this was just my park. And so I would be in there all the time, wandering around. And then slowly I would see more and more people as I was kind of walking around. And now it's just so crowded sometimes, it really speaks to the fact that there's such a need for people to come into this space and enjoy this beautiful forest. It has a waterfall, it has creeks, it has a artifact, a spring house artifact. It also has a pump house and miles of natural surface trails. And I have a presentation that we got together, and I joined the Friends group, which was existing, because over the years I've noticed that the park had run into it just started to fall into disrepair. It was a very natural space, but with all the growth that's been happening, some of the boardwalks and the bridges and the different features in the park have just become run down. And my goal was to find a way to attract investment so that we can improve the conditions of the park, and to work with the various community members and people who were already working on activating the space and educating people and stewarding the park to gain recognition from the city and from various other entities that this park needs to be properly funded and maintained. And also just to build relationships with the people who've already been working with the park. Wawa is a huge asset in doing that, because Wawa gave us the history. They gave us the connections with the people from the community who've been there from the beginning working with this park, so that we could actually we could successfully work to get funding. And one of the big helps in terms of funding was when we established a relationship with Park Pride. They guided us through a process where we could get funding, and we also were able to work with the Atlanta Fulton County Recreation Authority that helped us with funding. And then we also got funding from through our partnership with the Atlanta Audubon Society. So I'm just going to go ahead and start our presentation. Ellen, if you could assist me, and then I can just, it's a long assessment document that we completed in 2018. And I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the accomplishments we've undertaken. I'm not sure.
Do you want me to share?
Yeah,
your
if you
presentation?
could, yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, 1 second.
Sure. Do you want me to give it a try and see if I can share? Or you got it?
Hey, David, why don't you just try to share your screen like you did before?
Sure. I'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
I'm just going to go through really quickly and make sure this is the right document. Yeah, okay. So basically, can you see everything?
Yes, we can.
I know it's not full screen. Okay, wait a minute. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so basically, we completed this conditions report back in 2018, because as I said, there was the conditions had been falling into disrepair for years, and we wanted a way to work with a strategic planning committee, which involved various people who were existing in the Friends group, to figure out how we can target areas of improvement in the park. So we did an assessment. We started with the concept that, well, we knew that we wanted pedestrian access to be improved in the park. So this sort of is why we have this rendering here, where we're looking at the frontage of the park being improved with a multi-use trail, which is now actually in the works. It's going to be, construction is going to be beginning on the multi-use trail that's going to be in front of the park in the fall of this year. We started with the concept of creating links and eliminating barriers. We want to be linked to pedestrian access. We want better pedestrian access for our community to this park, because eventually there's only a limited amount of space you can use with cars. So the goal is that people will find other ways of transportation to the park. So linkage was a huge piece of our concept. Not only local visitors, but regional visitors are coming to the park. So we definitely have that in mind when we're looking at how do we improve this park. As I said, it's 125 acres. There's a waterfall. It features, it features a natural spring, of course. There's several natural springs in the park. And we have different cultural artifacts, which is a spring house, and we have a pump house. There's trenches, and it's also a site of the Civil War. But before that, a Civil War battle, rather. But before that, it was a land that was inhabited by the Muskogee Indians, Native Indians. Our role as the Friends of Cascade Springs Nature Preserve is to establish an emphasis on conservation, education, and active community participation. And for that, we have different guiding principles. We wanted to complete a quality of life assessment to identify how we can create a better environment for the park for the visitors. We looked at key areas: access, services and investment, and acreage. And those areas, we then started to go through the park, identify features in the park that would really sort of fall under the categories that we identified. And the reason we chose these categories were because the Trust for Public Land has a park score methodology in determining the quality of parks. And so we use that park score to really sort of assess the park. We graded each of the areas, and we gave them different scorecards. And as I go through this pretty quickly, you can kind of see that there's different scorecards that we've created for the different conditions. For example, you can look at the existing parking area back in 2018. We gave it I don't know if you can see, but the score for here was, I can't see the score because it's the stuff's covering it, but basically here's some of the scorecards. I'm just gonna thumb through these. The bridges and boardwalks were in pretty poor condition. The signage, we looked at the furniture, infrastructure, the trails, the wetland areas, invasive species, just the level of debris that's fallen over the trails, different artifacts. This is one of the spring houses that is in the park, and some of the ruins. We also looked at how we can expand access to the park. Right now, there's only one entrance. And as you can see here, this shows you that because there's only one entrance, the areas in the south of the park are identified as areas of high need for park access. So this is an opportunity for us to look at how we can expand access to the park by creating additional entrances. And part of the report was actually looking at how we can envision improvements. This is an example of how we conceptualize improving the frontage of the park. We looked at other parks and how regional parks had entrances. And so we decided, am I running over time here? Okay, I'll just hurry up quickly. And so we looked at different ways we can improve the pedestrian access to the waterfall. This is a concept of expanding the sidewalk and allowing for a pedestrian access to the waterfall from Cascade Road. Improving the parking area with facilities like for bicycles. Also looking at other facilities and safety and security facilities. Looking at repairing that frontage with fencing and other ways of creating educational resources for visitors. That would include signage on etiquette, property boundaries, and just different ways we can improve furniture, create a safer infrastructure for the areas around the park, like the walls that support the road. Looking at ways we can create boardwalks and improve trail surfaces in certain areas to protect sensitive areas. And also other ways we can just look at improving the general conditions. So this was an extensive effort, and it's helped us because we were able to submit these documents to the park, to the city, and have them consider improvements. And we've made considerable progress. The current conditions of the park are a lot different than in 2018 when we started this effort. For example, we have an ADA compliant boardwalk. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that here, but the boardwalk is a 200-foot boardwalk that was funded through Park Pride and the Atlanta Fulton County Recreation Authority. It's a 200-foot ADA compliant boardwalk. We've actually had the trailhead entrance improved so that it has updated furniture. We have we also have ADA compliant access to that trailhead. And so we've done quite a bit. And through our partnerships and with Park Pride, Wawa, Atlanta Fulton County Recreation Authority, Atlanta Audubon Society, we've done quite a bit, and we're still forging forward. And you know, we've been set back a little bit with our efforts to fundraise this year, but we're looking at how we can, you know, pick that back up with a virtual connection to our members and the community. And so again, we're just moving forward, and we just welcome anybody to get some information from us. I can give you my email. Right now, the email is Cascade Springs Friends at gmail.com. That's Cascade Springs Friends at gmail.com, and you can get in touch with us. Soon we'll have our website up. We're on Facebook, Friends of Cascade Springs Nature Preserve, and it's on Facebook. And we'll soon have our website up, and then we're going to continue just move forward and our partnerships. This map that I'm showing you right here, this is our trail. This is our current map of trails. We have 5 trails, and we're looking at forests. We have 5 forests as well, and this sort of gives you an idea of how we're sort of organizing our physical landscape in the park. That's all I have, I'll welcome any questions, I think, at any time that the organizers would like to do that.
Thank you, David. Yeah, we'll get to the questions at the very end. And I also put his email address down in the chat, cascadespringsfriends@gmail.com. So if you want to check on that. So next up, we have Corliss Clare of the Adams Park Foundation, and she's going to speak about her invasive removal project she's been working on.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody is safe and sane. The Adams Park Foundation was formed over a decade ago to restore the historic green space of Adams Park. But after some years of tackling invasive plant growth in the park, we came to understand the depth of the invasive problem and the widespread impact on trees, and decided to develop a project called Trees Alive. Trees Alive is an educational initiative specifically designed to foster sustainable behavior change, to help prevent the loss of trees and the creation of dangerous trees on private property due to the presence of widespread and aggressive growth from invasive vines. Most often those vines are English ivy, and it covers many of the trees throughout the city rather. About 60% of Atlanta's land is single-family residential, and that's where about 77% of our trees are located, and where the majority of the English ivy invested trees are found, because that ivy was planted many years ago and escaped its intended boundaries. It's often still planted, unfortunately, as ground cover. What we soon realized was that the problem that literally grows every single day simply cannot be managed without a citywide invasive plant management strategy that would include education, outreach, coordination of efforts, policy, and regulations. In 2017, with the help of former council member Norwood, we were able to amend the vegetation maintenance codes to provide better urban forest protection and restoration by adding more clarity and consistency to the enforcement of uncontrolled vegetation growth and nuisance plant control, while also encouraging more environmentally friendly landscapes. Our hope is that after the TPO is successfully rewritten, that we can expand our tree protection energies to the citywide invasive management issue. Otherwise, our small community efforts to protect our trees from invasives have the same impact of spitting on a wildfire to put out the fire. Thank you.
Awesome job. Thank you, Corliss. So next we're gonna speak to Judy Yee. She's the Director of Outreach and Marketing at Trees Atlanta. She's gonna speak on the tree protection ordinance and how you can get involved with understanding a little bit more about that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Once you are ready, tell me, and I will go. While Adriana is setting up my slides, I want to thank everyone for providing Trees Atlanta to give a quick overview of the tree protection ordinance. Corliss provided a nice segue into the topic because the tree protection ordinance is really about, as a community effort, if there's a demonstration of a city law or regulation that really shows where the individuals or how neighborhoods can affect change, it's truly through the trees. In a time when it feels like the scale of impact can be so massive that you have to be a big player to have any influence, getting involved in the tree protection ordinance is so accessible, meaning that what you do within your own backyard or within your own neighborhoods, or the single phone call that you make to your city council here in the city of Atlanta can have a tremendous impact. So I encourage you to come along with me. And if you are intrigued with any of these points that I'm about to present, feel free to reach out to me and ask further questions, because these notes, these slides have a lot of information in it, and I'm not going to be reading most of it just to respect time. So I am also very happy to send these slides to you personally if you send me an email at judy@treesatlanta.org so that you can digest them in a different pace. So I'll begin by giving a quick introduction of Trees Atlanta. For those of you who are not familiar with the organization, we are a nonprofit organization that our mission is focused purely on protecting and improving Atlanta's urban forest by planting, conserving, and educating. And if you have not had a chance to volunteer with us once we come out of these COVID times, I hope that you will sign up and join us either at an educational event or a volunteer event or even one of our social events. But in the meantime, hopefully you can engage with us through this tree protection ordinance rewrite. So first, let's start with kind of putting ourselves on a level playing ground, understanding why this is such an issue. Atlanta is currently known as the city in the forest, but we're also known for sprawl, for traffic, and for growth. Some interesting dynamics are happening right now. Due to climate change and other economic drivers, Atlanta is becoming a very popular city. Therefore, it's pressing even additional growth. The ARC, or the Atlanta Regional Commission, predicts that the city of Atlanta is going to more than double its population by 2050 to 1.2 million. You can understand how these drivers are going to pressure the need for more housing and more development. Already before those dynamics were in play, Georgia had some of the highest tree loss in the nation. Gwinnett, Fulton, and Cobb are the one of the leading counties in the Southeast for tree loss. Georgia is at the top of all states for tree loss. The crisis around this is that trees are intimately tied into human health and all the benefits that trees can provide, and we'll go over that very quickly. So here's a very, very long list of how trees improve the health and well-being of the people who live near them. Of these lists, as you look through them as I talk, I want to tease out a couple of them. One of them is that trees is an excellent mitigator of urban heat island effect. One of the things that we have to realize is that as heat increases, many other issues get exacerbated, in particular chronic illnesses. Pollution increases due to heat, ironically, asthma, cardiac issues. So when we're talking about protecting trees in Atlanta, we're not talking about just protecting nature per se. Well, one can also say that human beings are part of nature. So by protecting trees, we're protecting the people who live near them. And at the end of the day, our mission is focused in on the urban trees, but ultimately, if it doesn't benefit the people who live in the city, that is the bottom line. So I hope that you understand that a lot of times, and when we say that we must protect the forest or the trees within the within yards, people misunderstand our bottom line goal, which is the well-being of our community. So how do we get there? Ultimately, with all the technical reasons why trees might be so beneficial, one of the most powerful reasons might be that trees are beautiful. If we first teach our community, and especially our young people, that trees and the outdoors are fun and lovely places to find peace and enjoyment, and even during times such as this, some refuge, this nurturing of a love of nature is the most important first step. And then we can teach stewardship, whether it is just by cleaning our community, planting trees, or doing it through legislative matters such as the tree protection ordinance. So briefly, we're going to go over the basic what, whys, when, and how. But at the end of the day, what we need is for you to take this information, get involved in the process of rewriting, and ultimately contact your city council member, because they are the ones that are going to be voting on our ordinance. So let's dive in. First, next slide, please. First, let's talk about what is a tree protection ordinance. We assume that people know what we're talking about, but the tree protection ordinance are laws. You know, in the jurisdiction of the city of Atlanta, we have very unique laws regarding how we choose to protect our trees. Our neighboring cities have different laws, and most cities and even most counties will have these tree protection ordinances. There's standards that cover regulations on both private and public property. So that means what happens to trees in your personal household lawn, as well as what happens in parks or our street trees. In particular, the tree protection ordinance also allows the fees and fines to be collected in a tree trust fund. That fund allows us to plant more trees and care for trees. It allows Trees Atlanta to educate the public as well as other organizations. It also allows the city to purchase forested land for conservation. You might have heard in the news recently that the city of Atlanta completed the acquisition of buying 216 acres of forested land in Southwest Atlanta, known as Lake Charlotte Nature Preserve. We think that's a great win for a community that deserves to have more access to nature. And lastly, that fund also allows for a couple of positions to be funded who monitor the tree protection ordinance. But what people, next slide, what people might realize, be most familiar with what the ordinance is about the permits. On this slide, you'll see images of 3 signs that you might see around your neighborhood. What these are notifications that a tree might be removed. These are often the first sign that something's about to happen on that property. I won't go into the detail of this, but one of the things I do want to tease out is that you need to get a permit for the removal of any tree over a certain size. Generally, it's 6 inches for hardwoods and 12 inches for pines. If it's a healthy tree, you pay recompense. However, if you have a tree that's dead, dying, or hazardous and needs to be removed for your safety, there are no fees associated with it. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding regarding that, but I wanted to clarify that. And if you have questions about permitting, I'd be happy to walk you through that. So please do email me as a follow-up. Next slide, please. So Atlanta is rapidly growing. So one of the dynamics is that people are building larger houses on the same lot. What the ramification of that is we're not trying to deny people of big houses, but when these big houses take up more room, more trees are being removed. When those trees are being removed, You might have stormwater impact. Your neighbor's large house might result in more stormwater flowing into your lawn or to your streets. One of the most important things that the tree ordinance does is regulate what a builder needs to do and get permits and show site plans and what their tree protection ordinance is before they can move forward. Next slide. So in the city of Atlanta, we boast that we are the city of the forest. And in fact, we're at about 47, 48% canopy cover. This is a map of the city of Atlanta based upon the density of trees in any given area. There's a tool on our website, the Trees Atlanta website, that will actually help you identify to your city block what your canopy cover is. And I'll be happy to send out a link to that particular tool. But what these studies are showing is that there is a trend downward. These differences between the first study they did in 2008 and the last study they did in 2014 is not statistically significant, but when we did some ground truthing to see what's happening throughout the city, we are seeing more and more communities in town losing their tree canopy. And as Corliss pointed out, 77% of all the canopy that we have in the city are on single family residential lots. Why does this matter? It matters because you have the power to influence through our MPU system what will happen to the land throughout the city. So let's go into what's happening in the TPO right now. So right now, we are in the current process of rewriting the ordinance. The last time the ordinance was approved was in 2001. Since that time, we've updated standards. We have new technology and innovations that can help us build smarter so that we can protect more trees. The city has been engaged in this rewriting process for about 2 years now. Since that time, although a new ordinance has not been passed, 2 significant changes were implemented. In 2014, as I mentioned, we were able to buy Lake Charlotte recently because in 2014, an amendment was added to allow for the purchase of forested land using the recompense fund. And recently, in June of 2019, the council passed a resolution to insert a new process where large building projects have to go through a concept review committee where they're looking at the tree plan earlier in the process. This is one of the critiques that a lot of tree advocates are putting on the table, that we need consideration of tree protection to be advanced to the earlier part of the permitting process. Let me go into now what else has been done. Next slide. This is briefly, before I go into the next point, these are the organizations in the community who are supporting the rewrite process and who are also advocating alongside of Trees Atlanta and others on this call. So next slide, please. So the desired outcomes that Trees Atlanta is advocating for is, at the end of the day, do the changes in the tree protection ordinance achieve 3 major goals? 1, does it protect existing trees? 2, can we plant more trees with these new standards? And 3, does it allow us to save more forests? What we want is for us to honor the city's promise that there will be no net loss in canopy. We hope that they will set a specific goal of achieving 50% canopy cover in the city of Atlanta, so that the city and all areas of the city can benefit from all the good things that we articulated in the earlier part of this presentation. Next slide, please. So here are the details behind that, but just to save time, I won't go into all the details, but as you can tell, there's a lot of technical parts to this particular initiative, because after all, we are rewriting the law. But if we stick to these 3 major buckets and ask, when we review what the city planners are proposing as a new ordinance, as does it protect more existing trees? Does it allow us to plant more trees? And does it allow us to save more forested land? it will be a good guidepost. Last, can we go to the next slide, please? And so the issues in discussion are issues being presented by the city in draft. They finally presented some text recently in March. So if you go to the city website, you'll be able to read the current draft, which is dated March 2020. They are proposing increasing the recompense formula, which will make it more expensive to remove healthy trees. They are discussing what trees are of higher value than others. And they're talking about changing the process for public posting of tree removal requests and changing the appeals process. They're also allowing the concept of letting homeowners remove 1 tree per year, which is receiving a lot of heated debate around that. And they're thinking about reorganizing the enforcement of the ordinance under the Department of City Planning instead of splitting it up from City Planning and Parks and Recreation. There's some other nuanced information that you can read about when I share these slides with you if you're interested, but I'll go on to the next and near final slide. Next, please. Some of the recommended changes that Trees Atlanta is advocating for are that stronger requirements are necessary to save our existing trees during construction. As noted, the greatest pressure on our trees right now is development and the pressure to build larger and larger houses. Statistically, Atlanta has one of the largest square footage of housing in the entire nation, and part of it is because the cost to build is so low relative to the rest of the nation. So when developers remove trees, they are deferring the cost of the environmental impact to neighbors and the city while trying to trade off for maximum profit by building larger and larger houses. So for that point, we also recommend that land disturbance is limited. We also recommend that there should be more room to plant shade trees and allow for full growth. And we support stronger enforcement, and we hope that they'll add more incentives to use innovative solutions and designs. Lastly, we'd like to suggest that the recompense fees be matched to current market and land value. We hear over and over again that these fees that were meant to deter are merely a cost of doing business. And lastly, we have seen the need for greater access to data and regular reports from the city. Next slide, please. So how can you help to save the trees? Again, please contact the TPO or Tree Protection Ordinance Project Rewrite team and your city council member. I'll share those contact information with you. If you see illegal activities happening, please report them and take photos. You can call the police if you do see this happening after hours or during the weekend. Talk to your neighbors about these issues and engage in the NPU meetings and attend tree appeal hearings. Where decisions like these are made are at your neighborhood and NPU meetings, so please attend. And of course, plant a tree. And as Corliss recommended, please remove invasive plants from trees. We're losing some of our grandest trees due to invasives. And if you contact Trees Atlanta, we can even teach you how to do that. Okay, next slide. These resources are all the links that I mentioned earlier in the call, and I'll be happy to share these slides with you if you email me at judy@treesatlanta.org. And I think I'm a minute over, but I do thank you for your time. There's a ton of information to share, and I'm sorry if I blazed through it, but of course this conversation can continue after this call, so please do reach out to me.
Thanks, Judy. I'm going to try again to share my screen.
We are obviously super short on time, and it's 1 o'clock right now, but I will allow for a few questions that came through. Let's see here. Yeah, if there's any questions that anyone has, you're welcome to raise your hand at this time and we can call on you. If not, we can, you can always email me. And if you'll go to the next slide, Ellen, my email address is on here. And if you have questions for any of the participants, I can email them directly with those questions and get back to you. So if it's something that we're not able to answer during this time, we're more than happy to do that for you. And yeah, someone asked if it was being recorded, and yes, it is being recorded, this whole presentation. So we will be posting that on our Park Pride YouTube. So just give me a little while, and later on today, you should be able to access that on the YouTube. So if there's no questions, I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. And I just want to thank all the speakers that took time to be here today and share their knowledge with us. And we appreciate you guys, the guests, for showing up. And we hope that you learned something today. We hope that you'll definitely become advocates for the tree protection ordinance and, you know, come hang out in our wonderful parks on the Southwest side. Thank you, guys.